Welcome back to this episode of the Digitalacha podcast. If you remember, Digitalacha was developed by the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative to inspire creativity and enable educators to network in real time and share professional learning experiences, ensuring equity, access, and opportunity for all in our remote rural areas, regardless of zip codes. All learners are individuals and must be provided equitable opportunities for learning experiences that enable them to succeed both academically and socially. We do this through a lot of virtual networks. And today I am extremely pleased because I have with us today Kim Sargent, the Social Studies Instructional Specialist with the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative. And we're going to be talking about something very exciting to me. And I have to say, Kim, I feel kind of geeky because I'm like a National Geographic groupie. I mean, all my life, it's like, where's the National Geographic magazines? The National Geographic specials coming on. And I still do that. And my sons, they've watched so many National Geographic everything because of me. And so when I heard that you were being involved with National Geographic, I was like, oh my gosh, it's like 2 degrees separation. I know Kim Sargent, who knows National Geographic.
Oh my gosh.
So Kim, tell us about your role and how did this partnership with National Geographic evolve?
Well, as a social studies instructional specialist, I keep my radar out there, especially in regards to our new standards and anything that I can do to support teachers in implementing those new standards. And considering that Kentucky standards, so I have to maybe back up even one more step. Kentucky, when they adopted their new standards last July 2019, is that they are K-12. And most of the time when you think about social studies standards, for instance, in most states, as it is in Kentucky, they are assessed in 5th grade, 8th grade, and 11th grade. So the instruction tends to happen as close to those grades as possible because many times the focus is just on the assessment.
Right.
Well, Kentucky really, I think in an avant-garde way, did 2 things that were incredibly important. One, they made sure that instruction, socialized instruction, happened in every grade. So it became those standards became K-12. And then in the other component, they also made sure that they incorporated inquiry. That we actually have, Kentucky has 2 types of standards. They have, of course, the disciplinary concepts or the disciplinary strands, but most importantly, they also have the inquiry practice standards. So when you think of inquiry practice, you're thinking of, oh my gosh, well, you guys have actually incorporated practice standards, that you're actually telling people how to teach. It's not so much how to teach as much as it is how to present the information to the students to allow them to best use the disciplinary concepts or the disciplinary strands rather. So what happened in this, because it is K-12, we also have to acknowledge that in large part to, I should not say thanks to, but in large part to No Child Left Behind, that K-3 all of a sudden now has been picked up. Not only do they have new reading and writing standards, not only do they have revised reading and writing, they have revised math. They also have science standards to implement. They now also have social studies. They're overwhelmed. There's a whole lot for 4 years, a whole lot. So, and especially when you look at in Kentucky, they actually gave each one of those grades a focus. For instance, in kindergarten, it is me and my community is the focus for the social studies instruction in kindergarten. In 1st grade, it's me, my community, and my state. Then in 2nd grade, it goes to it goes to North America, basically is the best way to put it. So now you've gone from my state to not only, my country, but also my continent. Then 3rd grade is what they call global connections. So then you got the whole world. So when you take that into consideration, almost immediately when these standards were adopted, I had teachers, especially 3rd grade teachers, that would come up to me and not blink and say, can I talk to you about the new standards? And they looked almost comatose. And I'd be like, absolutely, because they were overwhelmed. Because it is a lot to teach at that time. So almost immediately, especially when I looked at 2nd and 3rd grade, and there was such a heavy geography focus, and when you talk about geography, that's not only culture, but also the economics, that connects all those countries. So there's so much involved that I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to support these teachers? So I became, and I knew that sometimes National Geographic would work in regions and they have regional support. And so I'm kind of one of those people that I don't know that I can't do something. So I'm the bull in the china shop. So I just called National Geographic. I found our regional contact person and called them and said, here's what I'm thinking. So what I wanted to do was like to create a cohort of K-3 teachers where they would come together, they would, and this of course is pre-COVID, but they, you know, they would come together and they would learn about how to use geographic inquiry, which is what National Geographic has a big focus on.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the inquiry aspects of the inquiry practices plus the geography. And within geography, you teach everything. You can teach the history, the economics, the civics, everything. So, you know, and I said, here's what I'm thinking, and I would really like to do this. How can you guys do that? And when I was talking to the person, she said, actually, that doesn't exist.
Wow.
So she said, so let's talk about that. And I said, okay, let's talk about that. So let me tell you what I need. So I created like the shopping list for National Geographic. And slowly but surely from that, because it just, as it turns out, there are 2 other states that were adopting similar standards, but that we ended up, the 3 of us in the 3 states. And so it evolved into this pilot program that we're currently working on.
Mm-hmm. So I'm Kim Surgent sitting at my desk, and I have this idea, and I think, I'm Kim Surgent. I'll just call National Geographic. I'll give them a list. This is what we'll do. And they're like,
Yeah.
you know, this is a great idea. So we're looking at a sense of place with this pilot. We talked about geography. So what are the goals of this pilot then? Who are they for?
The goals of this pilot is to focus on K-3 teachers and to give them the opportunity to come together to learn, first of all, to learn together, to engage in professional learning. Then once they engage in that professional learning around how to implement geographic inquiry, okay, and they're going to support each other in those steps. It's also as part of this pilot, another goal is for these teachers to become so familiar with their standards that their standards almost become second nature within the classroom, especially considering that they, again, I want to reiterate, they also have to teach reading and writing, math, and science. And see, and science and history, or science and social studies rather, that is, many people want to say that social studies and English are like the natural marriage. I think social studies and English are brother and sister. But I think that if, this is probably a really bad analogy, but that if you're going to date someone, you know, if there's going to be a marriage, it's going to be between science and social studies, because we think almost exactly identically.
That's hard for me to get my head around. I guess if you're thinking of geography within the science of this,
well, I think it's social studies.
Social studies.
Well, think about how geography. Okay, how does where you live impact how you live?
There we go. Okay. Yes.
So when you think of that, you know, especially like for instance, one of the first examples that I can think of right off the bat, because when you start talking about science, you're talking about environment.
Yes.
You're talking about its impact on the human, how those things interact.
Yes.
You know, and I could really go deep into the science part of that, but I won't. But anyway, like I think of that example. I think back when I was in college, there was this one, we call those things that blow up, volcano. So anyway, there was a volcano. I can't wait till people watch this.
You know, if those of you who are listening, what Kim was doing is she was drawing a triangle in midair, then exploding out the top. So
sorry about that.
Me to do charade.
And this is late after. Yeah, this is late afternoon after I've been in meetings all day.
This is awesome.
So what you're looking at is Zoom fatigue. But anyway, in full blown, Technicolor. But anyway, so what happened? So this one volcano was going to erupt in the Philippines, and what they had to do. And what they did at that time, because I remember, watching this unfold as a social studies major in our classes, because what we looked at, and I had a phenomenal professor at the time, and he said, what we've got to look at is who lives at the base of this volcano, where are they going to move to, how does it impact their lives, how does it change the way they live, yada, yada, and the whole kind of thing. So, and sure enough, when these natives that lived very near the base of this volcano, they had lived there for like 20,000 years. I mean, they had been, these people had prehistory in this region. So when they moved from there, approximately, pretty quickly within the next 3 years after that, they had about 50% of their population that died because it was such a shock to the system. And, physically, so that's what takes us to science. So science and social studies, and like for me, when I taught social studies, because, I've been out of the classroom now 6 years, when I taught it, for me, I think we see the greatest historical changes take place when technology gets involved.
Yes.
because that accelerates things significantly. And I think, I mean, when you look at how social media has impacted us as a nation or as a world in just the past 6 years, well, prior to that, the invention of the computer, and, you go back to, and I mean, and when you look at warfare, the technology that comes out of warfare, the impacts that makes on us physically, as well. I mean, there's constant intermarriage of all of that. I won't go deep into that, but I could talk about this all day, so I'm making myself stop.
So in thinking about that and talking about the Philippines and the place that happened and how that affect the people there, and you think about in rural Appalachian, Kentucky, in the sense of place, and thinking about this goals, about this marriage and this instructional and to meeting standards, and I'm going to use the word that one of our friends, Carol Mullins, uses, interdisciplinary standards and practices. What is KVEC's role then in helping push this forward with National Geographic? What's going to happen?
Well, I think KVEC's role in this is that we're going to be for this part of the state, and we are the other two partners that we have are states. So this is actually really special in that KVEC is a regional cooperative. So KVEC's role in this is that we are the conduit, so to speak. We're going to be what this information and this opportunity comes through to move out to the other teachers.
Okay.
So our role in that is that we're going to be the one that is going to create the opportunities for these teachers.
All right. So I'm a teacher, K2. I'm sitting in the classroom, and Kim Surgent comes to me with this exciting opportunity. What am I going to do? What are my students going to do? So how does the audience participate in this rollout of this learning through the standards?
Well, that's where it gets really complicated. First and foremost, and this, of course, initially is going to be virtually, that teacher is going to develop a deeper understanding of the social studies standards. Okay, first and foremost, it's going to kind of be, we're going to kind of start from that place, and then we're going to look at the inquiry practices and how those fit into that process. Then these teachers are going to engage in themselves or with each other around learning how to incorporate geographic inquiry into their classrooms, and using reading and writing to support that, using math to support that, because there are times that math and social studies interact significantly, but we won't talk about that today. And then, of course, science, and bring out, so how do you incorporate the geographic inquiry into your classroom for your, let's say your second graders?
Okay.
How are you going to bring that into your classroom? How are you going to introduce students to the process of questioning? Because inquiry starts with questions.
Right.
And sometimes it even ends in questions. And that's how you know you have a really good inquiry, is when it ends with even more questions. So, how do you engage the students in the questioning? How do you engage the students into bringing together sources to answer those questions? And how do you interact with those sources? So it's all very, interrelated, and most importantly, in many cases, especially when you deal with National Geographic, it also becomes interdisciplinary.
Yes. Okay. So you mentioned several times pilot and the work with the teachers starting virtually. So let's say we get back to not total virtual. What will happen beyond the virtual component?
Well, when we get to see each other face to face, and hopefully post-COVID that will happen. Okay. Is that what we will do? And my intent was, and that was one thing, I wanted much of the learning that we did to focus on place, and especially here in Eastern Kentucky, or if you want to call it Appalachian Kentucky, that's just as good to me. When we start thinking about where we are in terms of our place, there's a very strong attachment.
Right.
But I think that we also, not only in terms of that attachment, but we also have a very deep awareness of place and how it changes and how we change, because it does. I mean, I think back, they talk about the old wives' tales of, if the leaves flip over, it's going to storm, because the leaves are getting a drink of water. That's how my grandmother used to explain it to me. She always, red sky at night, that whole kind of thing. We have a real sensitivity to our environment. So when so hopefully post-COVID, when we come together, is that we're going to have that opportunity to go to place. Like, for instance, my favorite place in the whole wide world is the cut through at Pikeville. And people do not realize the historical significance of the cut through many times. I think people in Pikeville do. And, and I think that's one thing that they have done over there, because it is so strongly attached to their sense of identity as a community, the cut through is, that I do think the kids there learn it. But I know that, like my daughter, when we go to Pikeville or we drive through to Prestonsburg or wherever we're going, and you see the signs that says driving through the Pikeville cut through project, you're like, okay, it's a sign. Why is it there? But what people don't realize is that cut through, where they literally moved mountains, entire mountains, and created these roads and diverted rivers and streams and this whole kind. I mean, it's gargantuan. People do not realize that that is the second largest man-made project in the world. The one that it beat it out, okay, was the Panama Canal.
Okay.
And that's where you literally just completely wiped out an entire segment of an isthmus, the Isthmus of Panama. And they went in there and they created this very intricate system to allow, these ships to cross the Panama, the Isthmus of Panama, rather than go all the way to the bottom of South America to come back up on the other side.
And that's where that sense of place comes so important.
Mm-hmm.
So to understand Panama Canal, you can understand by looking in basically your own backyard,
Yes.
what we have right here in Appalachian, Kentucky.
Yes.
Then you can make that connection. So I think that's exciting. And I've seen that in other areas too. I was trying to teach one time about Victoria Falls. Kids couldn't relate. So I talked about, the Cumberland Falls of Kentucky. And they went, what falls in Kentucky? Field trip, So then we were able to make that connection. So it sounds like that whole sense of place, getting students connected. I'm very excited to see how this is going to pan out. You also mentioned several times pilot. So what makes this a pilot? Why isn't this a full-blown project going forward?
Well, it's a pilot because it's never been done. There's
Okay,
never been, we are in hopefully in the way that, the boat has been built. I'll put it that way. Okay. This is not a situation where we're building the plane or the boat as we sail or as we fly. It's not that. We spent a great deal of this past summer, I guess, creating ideas or generating ideas and focusing on the ones that were most important in creating the pilot. So we know the framework, we know how we want to do it and that kind of thing. So that's done. So that's why now we're inviting people to apply. But what's going to be different about this pilot is, one, the audience, the K-3 focus, because so often with social studies instruction, just like I mentioned earlier, that focus is always closer to assessment.
Right.
So, and so now we're actually consciously connecting with K-3 teachers. We're supporting their implementation. We're creating an opportunity for, students between the ages of 5 and 9 to engage deeply within the social studies. So this is really kind of different.
And it's nice to get them excited about their learning and being part of that work. Okay, so you're talking about this pilot and the audience. So how will you get an audience? How will you get teachers involved? How you will get students involved? What's the process for that?
Well, the most important person at this moment and at this phase of the project is the teacher. Okay, that's the big focus. So we have contacted instructional supervisors and principals, and going to really reconnect with them again tomorrow to get it out there, to get teachers to apply. I think that initially that teachers are going to be reluctant because they're so overwhelmed with virtual teaching, with remote teaching. I mean, and it's an overwhelming process. And it's an absolutely exhausting, as I've been in, I think this is my third Zoom today. So I'm kind of like, hey, but anyway,
hence the drawing triangles in space.
And trying to show people, was it something visual that really just needs to be completely auditory. But anyway, so the focus though is on those K-3 teachers and getting them to apply and to realize that in reality that this is actually going to help them in every component of the classroom, that they're going to be able, I think when they see how broad it is, that it's not just social studies, that there's reading and writing and math and science involved, and you're going to really be encouraging thinking in all of those areas and developing inquiry skills to begin with. I think that they're going to see that that's actually going to feed their classroom in a much more positive way than they think. But the teacher is the teacher to me, right along with the student, they're the most important people in the world, period.
So
that's where the magic happens.
So how many teachers will you need to have this pilot going?
We're really shooting for 30.
30.
We're
Okay.
shooting for I'm not going to, I have a much higher goal for applicants, obviously, but because this is a tremendous opportunity. So that's why we have a really large number. 30. We want to make sure that we're creating these what I like to call oasis of inquiry all around our region, so that it eventually just kind of, trickles out to the other classrooms, and teachers are like, oh my gosh, this looks so exciting when you do this. What are you doing? And it's like, well, I'm using this. So take this to your classroom, so that eventually it just kind of filters out into the school, out into the entire district. So, my goal is that every district, I would love it if every school were represented, but when you take into consideration that we have 30 and it is competitive, that we want to make sure that we get as many applicants as possible, because we really want an exquisite, representation across the region.
So applicants, how does one apply for this opportunity?
Well, that we're going to do, that has been mailed out. The applications have to principals and to instructional supervisors. However, tomorrow we are going to get that out there on the holler and work with, Tanner to do that. That's going to be out there, so we can get that sent out there on Twitter and really get that, rolling and moving. And that's why we love it that Digitalacha has got us, on board and is going to be part of that, so that we can really get that PR out there.
So that's at theholler.org. Now, Kim, our time's about up, but I want to say this is exciting for me. Again, I'm awesome. I just love National Geographic, and I will be keeping tabs on what's happening to see. And I am going to want you back as this pilot unfolds, and you're working with teachers, working with students. Hope to have you back with a teacher even.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's bring a teacher. And it would be great to bring students, but I'd love to get, 2 or 3 teachers in here.
Yeah. Well, I thank you so much for your time. This has been exciting to hear about this. And from the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative, we'll catch you next time on the Digital Lecture Podcast.